Between 1843 and 1847, at least 7 daughters from the wealthiest plantation families in Mississippi disappeared without a trace every spring. There were never any bodies discovered. There were never any investigations finished. According to the family, their girls were either married to distant cousins in Charleston or sent to finishing schools in Europe. There is, however, a leather-bound diary in Adams County's lost archives that provides a different account. A tale of ruthless, deliberately cruel treatment that, to stop it, 3 men were prepared to put their lives in danger. This is the true story of what transpired at the Kellerman estate barn, and the reason why Catherine Kellerman's body was never located. I need you to do something before we go on to the tale of the Kellerman farm and the most sinister secret ever buried by Mississippi society. Stories like this one, stories they attempted to obliterate from history, must be told. Therefore, please subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell. Additionally, let me know which state you are listening from in the comments section. We shall see how far this tale may go. The discovery that would rock the foundations of Mississippi's elite society was the culmination of the truth about Catherine Kellerman's fate, which started with her mother's infatuation. In the spring of 1843, Natchez, Mississippi was a testament to the wealth and well-preserved appearances of the South. Plantation families in the city competed not only for land holdings and cotton yields, but also for the elegance of their girls, the perfection of their lineages, and the total control they had over their entire territory. Mansions grew like white temples along the cliffs overlooking the Mississippi River, each one declaring its owner's superiority with Greek columns and well-kept gardens that took dozens of slave hands to keep up. About 4,000 acres of excellent cotton fields, located 15 miles northeast of Natchez town, comprised the Kellerman estate. In 1831, Lucinda Kellerman inherited the property from her father, a rare circumstance that made her wealthy and intensely resentful of the attention that came with her independence. She had become the judge of social acceptance among the plantation elite at the age of 42. Her meal parties were renowned for their precision. The angle at which the silver gleamed had to be exactly right. She had spent a short time in New Orleans studying French flower arrangements, and that was how the flowers had to be arranged. Through a regimen of tight corsets and vinegar water, her own form stayed reed-thin, leaving her unquestionably stylish but constantly out of breath. At the age of 19, Catherine Kellerman embodied everything her mother hated. Catherine had inherited her deceased father's propensity for sharpness and angularity, whereas Lucinda in relation to weight. Because her figure did not fit the willowy ideal Lucinda admired, she was deemed grotesquely fat by 1843 standards. However, Catherine's mother saw her size as more than just a physical trait. It was an intentional act of disobedience, a humiliation in public, a stain on the Kellerman name that became more noticeable every month. Lucinda would tell her closest confidants in a voice brimming with loathing, "She eats like a field hand. I have provided her with every benefit and chance to become a lady of quality, and she gives me this hideous act of indulgence in return." Lucinda never brought up the fact that Catherine's weight had started to rise sharply after her father. Thomas Kellerman passed away in 1839. It's possible that she was unable to acknowledge this to herself. Heart failure had been listed as the official cause. The secret, which only a few people knew, was that Thomas had passed away in his study with a letter to Catherine in his hand and an empty bottle of laudanum next to him. Lucinda had burnt the letter before anybody else could read it. The Kellerman plantation ran as brutally efficiently as Lucinda required everything to. The home, gardens, cotton fields, and other outbuildings that kept the estate running were all labored by 237 enslaved persons. Although none of them could have predicted the roles they would be compelled to play, 3 of them would go on to play important roles in Catherine's story. Born on the Kellerman property and trained as a blacksmith since boyhood, Joshua Fletcher was 34 years old. He was useful for any task demanding raw power because of the strength of his hands, which were scarred from years of hammering. He saw a lot, spoke little, and mentally recorded all the cruelty he saw, putting them away like money he could use for justice in the future. In 1841, Samuel Hayes, the second guy, had been bought at an auction in Natchez. He had already outlived 3 owners at the age of 28, each of whom was worse than the previous. Samuel's literacy, in addition to his physical prowess, was what Lucinda valued most about him. Samuel had been used to handle finances by his former owner, a failed merchant, an unusual and risky ability for an enslaved person to have. This schooling was useful to Lucinda, who used Samuel to oversee the plantation's animal records and grain stocks while constantly keeping a close eye on him. The third was Daniel Cooper, a 16-year-old kid who was bought from a failing Louisiana plantation because of his strength and youth. Daniel's brief life had been filled with traumas that had left him stuttering and prone to flinching at startling movements. However, he was also perceptive in ways that others were not, identifying subtleties and patterns that would later be important. At the eastern end of the main property was the barn where Catherine's story would take place. A huge building constructed in 1820 to hold cotton bales prior to their transportation to the river. The original barn had been reduced to storing grain and repairing machinery by 1843, when a newer warehouse had been built nearer the water. A grove of live oaks that were hidden from view from the mansion's windows separated it from the main house, making it the ideal location for activities requiring secrecy. The precise moment Lucinda's scheme came to fruition is revealed in her diary, which was found decades later in a fake trunk bottom. Today I observed the Ashworth girl, once a plump and unmarriageable creature, now transformed into a vision of delicate beauty. The March 15, 1843, diary states, Mrs. Ashworth told me how this miraculous transformation was accomplished. Labor, relentless, unrelenting physical labor. The body consumes itself when it is overworked, burning away excess to reveal the form that God intended. Why should the Ashworths be the only ones who can use this remedy? Why should my own daughter continue to be a monument to gluttony when salvation is so easy? What Lucinda did not write was that Margaret Ashworth's transformation had come at a terrible cost. The girl had developed a persistent cough that no doctor could cure. I have the means. I have the place. I have the workers who will obey without question. Catherine's transformation begins tomorrow. She was thin, and in Lucinda Kellerman's world, that was all that mattered. The social structure of Natchez society in 1843 was built on layers of secrets and silent agreements. Everyone saw things they agreed not to see, and everyone knew things they pretended not to know. Her hands trembled all the time, and her eyes had a vacant quality that suggested something fundamental had broken inside her. The system protected itself through mutual complicity, and Lucinda Kellerman had built her reputation on her ability to understand and take advantage of these unwritten rules. This conspiracy of silence was not passive. It was actively maintained through careful social engineering, whereby to inquire about the private affairs of another family was to raise questions about one's own, and to show concern for a daughter's welfare was to imply that one's own methods of child-rearing might be suspect. It was unusual for field workers to be brought into the parlor, and the three men stood uneasily among the fine furniture and delicate china, acutely aware that their very presence violated the careful boundaries that kept the plantation's dual realities separate. She knew exactly how far she could push the boundaries of acceptable behavior before crossing into scandal. She knew which ministers would preach about the virtue of discipline without specifying its methods, which families would ask no questions, and which doctors would issue certificates of health without examination. "Gentlemen," Lucinda said, her voice retaining the phony friendliness she employed when issuing commands that she assumed would be dutifully followed. "I have a unique mission for you. Catherine, my daughter, needs physical therapy. She has grown weak and lethargic, making her unfit for the responsibilities that would eventually fall upon her as this estate's mistress. In the East Barn, you will supervise her daily tasks. You'll make sure she works from sunrise to sunset. I'll give you a ledger to record her development in, and you'll be punished if you discuss it with anyone. I hope I don't have to explain." Unspoken but understood, the menace lingered in the atmosphere. If you disobeyed, you risked the whip, a voyage to Louisiana's cruel sugar fields or worse. However, Lucinda had a look in her eye, as though she were going to perform an experiment whose outcomes she anxiously anticipated. There was a sense of expectation, almost exhilaration. This deal was made without consulting Catherine herself. Still wearing her nightgown beneath a plain work dress that Lucinda had chosen, she was escorted from her bedroom by her mother's personal maid and brought to the barn on the morning of March 17th. The girl's expression was one of deep resignation rather than surprise, as if this were just the most recent in a long line of humiliations her mother had planned. The barn's first morning started off with mechanical effectiveness that felt practiced, as though Lucinda had orchestrated every aspect of Catherine's decline. Daniel, Joshua, and Samuel had received their orders with military accuracy, Catherine had to split firewood till her hands blistered, move 50-pound sacks of grain from one end of the barn to the other, and grind maize in the manual stone mill. The purpose of the task was weariness rather than output. Every work was designed to challenge her body's capabilities, while yielding just enough valuable results to make the effort worthwhile in the event that someone inquired. The barn itself boosted each sound. The sound of stone rubbing on grain reverberated off the tall ceiling. The three men found themselves subconsciously following the beat of Catherine's hard breathing. Time seemed to be marked like a clock by the creak of the building's ancient timbers. Every wood groan serves as a reminder of the harsh monotony of the hours that have passed. Samuel was particularly impressed by Catherine's stillness during those initial days. She didn't grumble. She didn't beg. She only asked for water, which they were told to give sparingly without saying anything else. She worked as though she had detached herself from her body and was observing from a distance, her face remaining expressionless. Every afternoon at exactly 3 o'clock, Lucinda showed there, her skirts rustling on the barn floor as she walked around her daughter like a buyer checking cattle. She had a leather journal with her, recording measurements in it. Observations and evaluations conducted with clinical objectivity. She posted on March 20th that she weighed an estimated 195 pounds. The face is still swollen. Arm circumference has slightly decreased. Sadly but essential, calluses are forming on the hands. Temperament that is suitably restrained. The course of treatment goes according to plan, but only a portion of the story was revealed via Lucinda's journal entries. The private chats she was having with other plantation ladies who had girls they deemed problematic were not documented by her. Rebecca, the daughter of Mrs. Helena Cartwright, was discovered reading abolitionist books that were brought in from the North. Emma, the daughter of Mrs. Beatrix Singleton, had turned down 3 good marriage proposals because she insisted on pursuing a career in medicine. Mrs. Constance Whitfield, whose daughter Sarah was found to be secretly teaching reading to enslaved children, under a variety of guises including afternoon tea, garden advice, and conversations about forthcoming social gatherings, these women would visit Kellerman Estate. However, they always requested to view the barn, and Lucinda always granted their request, guiding them through the oak forest to observe Catherine's metamorphosis. Lucinda would point to her daughter's weary body and say, "You see, just as the spirit reacts to discipline, so does the body. After 3 weeks of healthy labor, the surplus is already starting to go away. Consider what 3 months, 6 months, or a year could achieve." The guests made notes. They questioned the duration, supervision, and techniques. They asked if Catherine was allowed any free time and what her dietary limitations were. Lucinda shared her groundbreaking findings and responded to every inquiry with the zeal of a scientist. "No leisure," she said. "This issue was brought about by leisure. Indulgence and indolence are sisters that make our daughters feeble." Catherine discovers the importance of effort here. Comfort must be earned, she discovers. She discovers that she cannot use gluttony to destroy her own body. By the other girls arrived first April, 3 enslaved men, who had received the same instructions as Joshua, Samuel, and Daniel, were in charge of Rebecca Cartwright when she was taken to a barn on her family's land. 2 weeks later, Emma Singleton and Sarah Whitfield came next. Although each family adjusted the strategy to meet their own need, the fundamentals stayed the same: work, loneliness, and the severing of wills under the pretext of physical progress. None of these mothers had expected their daughters to talk to each other. Plantations were dispersed across the county, but slaves traveled from property to property delivering news and messages. Daniel, who occasionally delivered grain to nearby estates, started to see a trend. Suddenly, barns that had been used for storage were forbidden. Suddenly, the young white women who had been a regular presence at social events were no longer there. When they visited relatives or were ill, their mothers would explain. Daniel whispered to Samuel, "There are others," one evening as they locked up the barn. "I saw girls working like Catherine, and they appeared equally exhausted, just as frightened." Samuel experienced a chill in his abdomen. The cruelty they were seeing was not an isolated incident. It was a methodically built and growing system. Catherine was experiencing something unexpected inside the barn. Although the labor was harsh and intended to shatter her, it was also the first time in years that she had been free of her mother's unrelenting criticism and inspection. She was just a body doing things in the barn. Her failure to live up to unreasonable expectations was not reflected in any mirrors. She was never showcased at dinner parties as proof of her mother's dissatisfaction. Additionally, she was shocked by the meticulous respect that Joshua, Samuel, and Daniel showed her. They didn't make fun of her size. They said nothing about the way she looked. Joshua would discreetly position himself to shoulder some of the weight when she was struggling with an especially heavy load. Samuel brought clean rags and demonstrated how to wrap her hands to stop the bleeding from the rough wood. Daniel grasped her as she staggered from fatigue and examined her objectively. 6 weeks into her imprisonment on April 8th, Catherine spoke for the first time outside of asking for water. Joshua was fixing a piece of equipment nearby as she was sleeping during the short lunch break. With a whisper, she questioned, "Do you hate me?" Joshua's hands froze on the implements. He avoided making direct eye contact with her since he knew that if someone saw them, it may be interpreted as insubordination. "You should," Catherine added, "because I am everything you should despise." "No, miss," he said cautiously, "your owner's daughter, who lives comfortably while you suffer." "Hate takes energy, miss," Joshua said, choosing his words carefully as if he understood that being honest could cost him his life. "I would hate me. Surviving is a better use of energy." For the first time, Catherine started to view the three men as human beings caught in the same harsh system, if in fundamentally different ways, rather than as extensions of her mother's will. It was a simple remark, but it opened something inside her, various ways, and the talks became longer, always in cautious whispers during breaks or early in the morning before Lucinda's inspection. Catherine discovered that Joshua had a wife and 2 kids living in the quarters, that Samuel had lived in a city and was better at reading and writing than most white men, that Daniel dreamed of the freedom he might never have, and that the men learned about Catherine's life in the mansion, which was its own kind of captivity, the incessant rules about dress and deport, the constant criticism of every food bite. Every one morning in May, Catherine said, "She wants me to disappear. She wants the daughter she imagined, not the one she has. I think she hoped this work would kill me so she could tell people I died of a wasting disease and finally be rid of her embarrassment." Samuel, who had been listening while feigning to organize grain sacks, felt a chill at these words because he had started to suspect something similar. Words spoken, every breath taken, the isolation from other young people her age because her mother thought she was too shameful to be seen. The girl was losing weight, but she was also getting stronger from the labor. Her arms showed muscle definition, her breathing had become easier. She was not wasting away as Lucinda had perhaps hoped. She was adapting. Lucinda's visits had decreased, but when she did come, she appeared disappointed rather than pleased by Catherine's survival. As spring turned to summer, Lucinda Kellerman's journal entries became darker, and her clinical observations gave way to frustration, rather than a cold calculation that suggested she was thinking of taking more drastic measures. June 3, 1843. Catherine doesn't lose weight despite the labor's rigors. Maybe the rations need to be further restricted, or maybe the work needs to go on at night. The Cartwright girl has shown marked, "Why should Catherine be different, I'm told?" What Lucinda didn't know was that Joshua had been adding food from the quarters to Catherine's meager rations. Not much. Just enough to prevent her from the dangerous malnutrition that was causing the other girls to become ill, at great personal risk, sharing portions that his own family needed because he had started to see something in Catherine that reminded him of his own daughter, a basic innocence, a desire to be seen as human rather than an object. "Your mother would have me whipped for looking at you directly," Joshua said one afternoon as they worked together to move a broken piece of equipment. Other changes were also taking place, subtle changes in the dynamic within the barn that none of them had expected. Catherine and Joshua had started to speak more freely during the long hours of work, and what had begun as brief exchanges about tasks turned into conversations about life, hope, and the absurdity of a world that valued some lives over others, based on skin color or body shape. However, as we work side by side in this barn, what makes us different? Both of us bleed. Both of us are exhausted. Both of us desire to be free of the things that hold us back. The similarity had never occurred to Catherine. Undoubtedly, her incarceration differed from Joshua's, but it was still incarceration. She was unable to get out of the barn. She was unable to make decisions for her own life or body. She was merely an issue to be resolved, a flaw to be fixed. In late June, they made their first intentional, as opposed to accidental contact. When her strength faded, Catherine slipped while raising a sack of grain. They stood near enough to feel each other's breaths for a little moment after Joshua caught her. Neither one shifted. There appeared to be more danger and possibility in the air between them. Equally, Catherine muttered, "We should not." But she didn't back down. "No," Joshua concurred. "We should not." However, neither of them took any action. They had established an environment in that barn, cut off from the outside world where the norms of plantation life appeared aloof and flexible. Perhaps what happened next was predetermined. Or maybe they both made the decision to put connection before safety even though they knew the repercussions. Samuel and Daniel always acted as unintentional guardians, alerting them if anyone approached, and their bond grew in stolen moments. What started out as solace developed into something more profound. A sincere love that went beyond the impossibility of their predicament. However, secrets have a way of coming to light. And by the middle of July, Daniel and Samuel were both aware of what was going on. They didn't discuss it explicitly, but they shifted to give each other more solitude, made chores that needed Catherine and Joshua to work in the barn's rear corner, and diverted their focus when they did have time to spend together. One evening, after Joshua had gone to the quarters and Catherine had been brought back to the main house, Samuel told Daniel, "This is going to end badly." Daniel, who at 16 realized the cruelty of the world in ways that should have been beyond his years, nodded slowly as he said, "There is no version of this story that ends well. Perhaps they deserve a little happiness, even if it's just temporary. Perhaps that's all any of us get." Lucinda, preoccupied with her growing network of rehabilitation barns throughout the area, was blind to her daughter's transformation. She was too busy recording her techniques, writing to interested families as far away as Georgia and Alabama, and figuring out how much money she might make by providing her services as a consultant on rehabilitating wayward daughters. Her goals are evident in her July 12th journal. The level of interest in the therapeutic approach has surpassed all expectations. In a letter, mobile resident Mrs. Patricia Rutherford asked for a thorough protocol. Her daughter insists on drawing instead of concentrating on appropriate achievements. Savannah's Mrs. Vivian Caldwell asks about the results, voicing worries about a daughter who has taken an inappropriate interest in the family's financial matters. There is significant room for growth. Maybe the title of a published treatise on the topic, Correcting Female Indolence Through Measured Labor, would be suitable. However, Catherine's body was changing in a way that had little to do with losing weight while Lucinda prepared her merciless empire. She started getting morning nausea around early August. She initially blamed it on the bad meals and ongoing fatigue, but she realized what had happened when her monthly courses did not arrive. In a quiet moment while Samuel and Daniel were busy at the far end of the barn, she told Joshua first. She muttered, her palm automatically going to her stomach, "I am with child." "Your kid." Joshua's expression changed several times. Fear, shock, and then a compassion that brought tears to Catherine's eyes. But this meant something to both of them. It would be impossible to conceal a pregnancy. It would have disastrous results when Lucinda found out. Catherine's voice broke as she whispered, "They'll kill you. For this, my mother will have you killed. Maybe all three of you to make sure nobody mentions it." In a move so risky and essential that neither cared who could witness it, Joshua grasped her hands in his. "After that, we can plan. We have time to figure this out." However, information was necessary for planning, and risk was necessary for information. Samuel started to collect what he could by leveraging his literacy and his sporadic access to the plantation office. Plantation letters, property documents, and bills of sale. He was searching for anything that would show how big Lucinda's network was, any vulnerability they might take advantage of. He was surprised by what he discovered. Entries that indicated at least 4 more girls had gone through were concealed in a ledger under family costs. Prior to Catherine, Lucinda was treated. A final note that read disposed of natural causes, transferred to family in Texas, or simply resolved appeared next to each name. What is meant by resolved? Late one evening, when Samuel showed Daniel the entries, Daniel inquired. Samuel's face was serious. Nothing positive. Absolutely nothing positive. The trend was obvious. Girls who were too disobedient, did not lose weight, or did not react to the treatment were just erased from the records. Letters informing their relatives that they had been sent away for their own good or certificates of death were given to them. However, there were no forwarding addresses, no cemeteries, and no trail to pursue. Catherine doesn't realize how dangerous she is, Samuel added. Even if her mother determines she has not responded to the treatment without the pregnancy, she will be simply put out of her misery. They had to do something, just like everyone else. However, any action would necessitate resources that they lacked. Cash, papers, and conveyance. The instruments of liberty were carefully kept out of the hands of those who most needed them. Catherine came up with the impossibly difficult solution. She said it was my father's study. He had money stashed there before he passed away. And papers. Records pertaining to the plantation. That is a room my mother never enters. When he died, she had it locked. However, I am aware of the key's location. They came up with the strategy out of despair, and the far hope that the impossibly difficult could somehow become feasible. Catherine would become more ill from the labor, which would give them a reason to return to the main house more often. On one of these occasions, she would enter her father's study and take out any cash and records she could locate. Joshua, Samuel, and Daniel would try to get fictitious freedom documents and travel north using these resources. However, each part of the plan needed equal parts chance and accuracy. The study was located on the mansion's second level and could only be reached by going past rooms occupied by housekeepers. Rooms occupied by housekeepers worked non-stop. The key was concealed under a music box that had formerly belonged to Catherine's grandmother in Lucinda's own bedroom. Additionally, the time has to be ideal. There would have to be somewhere to keep Lucinda busy. It would be necessary to divert the attention of the servants and have the guys in the barn come up with a reason why Catherine had been let to go. They made an effort at the first phase on August 17, 1843. Catherine cried out with such conviction that even Samuel, who was aware that she was performing, was alarmed by her complaints of excruciating stomachache. The performance was successful. Catherine was carried to the house and confined to her room by Lucinda, who was annoyed that her afternoon communication had been interrupted. Lucinda declared that she would go back to the barn tomorrow for double work if she was lying. Dr. Harrison will assess her and administer the proper care if she is truly ill. Catherine was frightened when a doctor was mentioned. Any test would show she was pregnant. Before it became impossible to hide her condition, she had maybe 24 hours to go to the study and get back to the barn. Catherine waited until the house had gotten into its regular rhythm, while Lucinda went to a dinner party at a nearby plantation that evening. She was aware of the trends. By 9 p.m., the servants would be done with their nightly work. By 10 a.m., her mother's personal maid would go to bed, and the home would be silent until the kitchen crew started working at 5 a.m. She had a 7-hour window. She recalled seeing the music box on Lucinda's dressing table, wincing at the tinkling music that seemed impossible to hear in the quiet house. Catherine opened it with trembling hands. There it was, a little iron key fastened to a blue to gray fading ribbon. The smell of tobacco and old leather in her father's study reminded her of a time before everything had gone wrong, before her father's unexplained death, before her mother's harshness had reached its peak. Catherine gave herself permission to take a moment to sorrow before concentrating on the assignment. Just as her father had shown her years before, the money was under a desk drawer's fake bottom. $300 in different bills, a windfall that may be used to purchase a fresh start and travel north. What really startled her, though, were the documents she discovered. Dozens of letters from as far back as 1839. Her father wrote letters to a Philadelphia lawyer outlining his intentions to free all of the slaves on the Kellerman farm. Letters outlining his moral awakening, his growing disgust for the system of slavery, and his resolve to follow his conscience despite the financial and social repercussions. And one more letter, addressed to Catherine herself, was opened. If you're reading this, my beloved daughter, you know that I haven't found the courage I required in life and may have just discovered it in death. Perhaps I did die of heart failure, as your mother would tell you. My heart lacked the will to endure against the evil in which I have long engaged. While I'm alive, I can't release the people I've enslaved because your mother will stop me at any costs. However, I can make sure that the resources for their independence are in place once I pass away. This drawer contains money for you. But since I was unable to assist those who deserved freedom in obtaining it, I hope you would make advantage of it. Please pardon my cowardice. Please pardon me for abandoning you to your mother's brutality. A better father is what you deserved. A better owner was due to them. A greater soul was what I deserved. As she stood in the dimly lit study, Catherine's tears made her father's remarks difficult to understand. Heart failure had not claimed his life. Overwhelmed by shame and the knowledge that he could not alter the system that had benefited him, he had committed suicide. Lucinda had concealed this fact, destroyed the letter he had left behind, and sealed off any proof of his metamorphosis. She took the letters and the cash. However, she discovered something else as well. The will of her father was never performed or probated. Within it, with clear orders that the slaves would be manumitted upon his death, he gave the plantation to Catherine rather than Lucinda. By faking her deceased husband's signature on paperwork that kept her in control, Lucinda concealed this document and carried on running the plantation as though she had acquired it legally. They required this leverage. This evidence has the potential to undermine Lucinda's authority and call into question the basis of her power. However, in order to use it, one would need to have access to the legal system, which would include judges and attorneys who would never consider the opinions of an oppressed man or an obese daughter who her mother had declared incapable. As the sky started to lighten, Catherine went back to her room. Knowing Lucinda would never look in her closet during the summer, she concealed the money and documents in the inner of a winter coat that hung there. The following morning, she announced that she cured and prepared to go back to the barn. Untrustworthy but unable to demonstrate malingering, Lucinda consented, but with a warning that made Catherine shudder. "Tomorrow, Dr. Harrison will come to the barn to examine your physical state. According to Lucinda, he has voiced concerns that the work might be too taxing. I've told him you're doing well on this regimen, and I'm counting on you to back it up. Any other idea will lead to repercussions you won't like." The doctor's appointment meant learning something new. It was the end of the world. They might have had a day to take action. The four of them realized they had passed a threshold when Catherine came back to the barn and showed them what she had discovered. They had equipment that could subvert Lucinda's influence. However, to use those tools, one would have to leave the plantation, surviving long enough to share their story, and getting their message to authorities who might listen. Joshua declared, "We leave tonight," with a confidence that belied their dire circumstances. "All four of us. We take the money, the documents, and we run." "They will hunt us," cautioned Samuel. 3 runaway slave men and a white woman will be the target of every slave patrol in Mississippi. We won't reach the 10-meter mark. However, Catherine thought of something. The result of years of seeing her mother carefully control appearances. "We're not going to run. We're going to be on the road. I'll be a widow visiting relatives in Kentucky with my maids. The funds will cover the cost of travel documents from a Natchez forger. If someone were to question me, my father's letters would serve as proof. All we have to do is get to the river and reserve a seat on a riverboat bound for the north." They only had one plan, but it was a plan with 1,000 ways to go wrong. The rest of the daylight was spent preparing for their escape. They all had assignments to finish without drawing suspicion. Over a foundation of horror, a delicate dance of normalcy is performed. The most hazardous role was Samuel's. To find a forger operating out of a warehouse close to the riverfront, he would have to go into Natchez after midnight and track down Crawford, a free black man. The cost of the forger's services was high, and locating him meant navigating a city that grew more inhospitable to any black person after nightfall. $50 of Catherine's money would be carried by Samuel. It would be sufficient to buy some essential travel documents, but not enough that its loss would ruin the whole scheme. Joshua concentrated on assembling the necessary equipment for the trip: perishable food, travel-appropriate apparel, and, above all, weapons. 2 knives were obtained by him from the plantation's tool shed, concealing them in the rafters of the barn so that they would not be discovered by a casual check. Even though they weren't very effective against rifles, they were still something. Daniel had to come up with an alibi. After the others had gone, he would stay in the barn to make it look as though Catherine was still imprisoned there. Daniel would say that Catherine had escaped during the night, overwhelming him and running away by herself, when Lucinda came for her inspection in the morning and discovered her gone. He would receive punishment for the story, possibly harsh punishment, but the others would benefit from it. Duration prior to the sounding of the alert. Catherine was devastated by the 16-year-old slumbering acceptance of this position. Daniel worked out the specifics of his narrative and remarked, "I will say she threatened me with a tool, that I was afraid for my life, that she was insane. They'll think I may be scared of a white woman. I'll be seen as a coward by them. Allow them to think it." Catherine wrote letters all afternoon. One was addressed to her father, who would never read it, informing him that she had discovered his secret will and comprehended his last deed. One to her mother, which she did not intend to send, and another to Daniel, thanking him for his sacrifice and vowing to return for him if she lived. She described all of the abuse, humiliation, and instances during her 19 years that Lucinda had put control over compassion and appearance before love. Catherine said, "I want her to know," as she closed her last letter. "The horror in Mississippi intensifies just when we think we've seen it all. If this story is chilling you, share this video with a friend who enjoys dark mysteries. Even if we fail, even if they catch us and kill us, I want her to know that I saw her for what she truly is. Not a mother, not even a person, just an empty shell wrapped in expensive fabric, mistaking cruelty for strength." Let's see what happens next. Because what they found waiting for them in Natchez would change everything. As the sun set, Samuel left for Natchez, slipping away from the plantation with the practiced ease of someone who had learned to move through the world invisibly. The 8-mile journey would take him 3 hours on foot, following paths that avoided the main roads and the patrols that watched them. Don't forget to subscribe to never miss stories like this and hit the like button to support our content. They had done everything they could to prepare, but preparation could not account for the 1,000 variables beyond their control. What if Samuel was unable to find the forger? What if the documents were not convincing? What if Lucinda decided to visit the barn unexpectedly? Catherine, Joshua, and Daniel waited in the barn in an oppressive silence, each minute feeling like hours. Joshua finally mentioned the thing they had all been avoiding during this waiting period. "If we are caught, they will kill me. Samuel and Daniel too. They will make examples of us. But you, Catherine, they might let you live. Even so, if we are cornered, you must deny everything. Say we kidnapped you, forced you to help us. I will not. We either survived together or we failed together. I have lived my entire life being told what to do, who to be, and how to live for the comfort of others. This is the first decision that is really mine, and I choose you." Catherine's response was swift and adamant. "I pick this. Whatever happens." The words hung between them, a proclamation and a farewell in equal measure. Joshua drew her close to him, and they stood together in the dark, suffering from the weight of their impossible decision. Daniel, who was standing close to the door, shed tears he could not quite put into words, seeing something that shouldn't have happened in their world. True love. The relief on Samuel's face before he spoke a word told them he had succeeded. "Crawford sends his regards," he said, pulling a packet of documents from inside his shirt. Mr. Samuel returned just before midnight, and the sight of flowers blooming in a burning building was both beautiful and terrible, like watching flowers bloom across a divide that the entire social structure was designed to prevent. They looked at the documents by candlelight, and the forgery was excellent, complete with official-looking seals and signatures that would mean nothing to most inspectors, but would create the appearance of legitimacy. He included a bill of passage for the steamboat and letters of introduction to a hotel in Natchez. "It cost every penny of the $50, but he does good work. The documents will pass inspection unless someone looks too closely." The irony of the documents was not lost on any of them. To travel as free people would draw immediate suspicion, but to travel as owner and property, they could move through Mississippi's checkpoints with relative ease. The system that enslaved them would be the very tool of their escape. "We leave in 2 hours, Catherine." Joshua, Samuel, and Daniel were listed as her property, valued at $3,000 total, being transported north for sale to settle her late husband's debts. Her fictional husband had died of yellow fever in New Orleans. The plan was sound, but as they were about to leave, Daniel's voice interrupted them. "Miss Catherine, there is something you should know, something I seen but did not speak of until now. The roads will be quietest between 2 and 4 in the morning, so we walk to Natchez, staying off the main road, and present ourselves at the steamboat office at dawn as late-arriving travelers seeking passage on the earliest boat heading north." Daniel said slowly, "The other girls, the ones in the barns on other plantations." The boy's face displayed a fear that went beyond their immediate danger. "Last week I was instructed to deliver grain to the Cartwright place," Daniel said. "The barn where Miss Rebecca was kept was empty, not just empty of her but cleaned, scrubbed clean like someone was erasing evidence." The implications hung over them like a shroud. Rebecca Cartwright, the first of the other girls to receive Lucinda's treatment, was gone. Not transferred, not sent away. Gone in a way that necessitated cleaning a barn of all evidence. I asked one of the Cartwright workers what had happened to the girl, but he refused to tell me, but he gave me such a pitying look. How many others? Catherine murmured. Daniel acknowledged that he was unsure, but he had seen 3 barns, Cartwright, Singleton, and Whitfield, that had been cleaned and emptied. All of them had begun following your mother's arrival. Catherine felt bile rise in her throat as she realized that her mother had not only been experimenting on her, but had also established a system that was killing young women throughout the county in the name of social acceptance and physical perfection, and that the families who were desperate to fix their daughter's alleged flaws had participated in their deaths. We cannot just save ourselves, Catherine said, trembling with anger and sorrow. We must reveal everything, the treatments, the deaths, everything. But with a pained expression, Joshua shook his head and said, Catherine, we will perish before anyone notices if we attempt to reveal this before we are secure. First, we must live. We need to get in touch with those who can look into it. Only then can we bring about justice. Catherine was aware that he was correct. However, she felt involved in the very evil she aimed to eradicate because she knew that they were abandoning Daniel, and that other females might be in pain even as they fled. They collected what little they had, the papers, the last of the money, the knives, and some food. The letter Catherine had written to her mother was the final item she took. She would preserve it as a record of Lucinda's actions, but she would not mail it. Anything longer would have crushed them all. So the farewell to Daniel was short. Catherine gave him a hug as the boys stood at the barn door. This youngster was putting their safety ahead of his own. I'll be back for you, she said. I'll return when we're safe and have the ability to take action. We won't forget you. Unable to say, Daniel nodded. He observed as the trio, one of them, vanished into the shadows, vanishing into the live oak grove that had concealed so many secrets about the barn. It took 4 hours, not 3, to walk to Natchez. They traveled carefully, pausing often to listen for other travelers or patrols. Although it helped hide them, the moonless night made the path dangerous. Unaccustomed to walking great distances, Catherine found it difficult to keep up, but she persisted, propelled by equal parts fear and resolve. They arrived in Natchez's outskirts just as the sky started to get lighter. Already the city was waking, shopkeepers opening their establishments and early morning workers making their way to the ports. In an attempt to appear less like a runaway who had spent the night in the woods and more like a respectable widow, Catherine washed her face and hands with some of their valuable water. Lamplight already illuminated the windows of the steamboat office, which stood out on the waterfront. A clerk was seated behind a desk inside, going over manifests and lists of passengers. As they walked in, his attitude changed from one of professional civility to one of slight astonishment as he looked up to see the strange gathering. A young woman with 3 enslaved men alongside her, obviously aristocratic despite her disheveled appearance. Good morning, madam, began the clerk with the cautious objectivity of one who has been taught to serve the rich without inquiry. How may I help you, he said. Catherine had mentally practiced this scene 100 times, but her voice almost failed her now that it was here. But she forced herself to look into the clerk's eyes, summoning all the imperious confidence of her mother. I need passage to Louisville on your earliest departure, she said, setting the falsified documents on the desk, because my servants and I have had a rough journey, and I want to finish our travels as quickly as possible. The clerk looked over the papers with professional thoroughness, and Catherine's heart pounded so hard she was positive he could hear it. Behind her, Daniel, Joshua, and Samuel stood with their heads down, all of them doing their parts flawlessly. The Morning Star departs at 8 how, acknowledged the clerk at last. Catherine said, that will be acceptable, but the term property made her stomach turn. I can arrange a private cabin for you, madam, and quarters for your property in the cargo hold. As the clerk completed the transaction, she watched his expression stay neutral while she counted out the cash from her handbag. Greetings. Mrs. Kellerman on board the Morning Star, he added, passing the tickets to her. Catherine gave herself a glimmer of hope when she said, May your journey be peaceful. They had done it. In less than 3 hours they would be on a steamboat heading north, away from Mississippi, away from Lucinda, away from the barn, and everything it represented. However, Samuel gave her a kind pat on the arm as they left the office and made their way to the dock where the Morning Star was being loaded. A whisper, Miss Catherine, he said. She followed his eyes to a man wearing the rough clothes of a river worker who was standing close to the warehouse and said, We are being watched. However, his stance was incorrect. He was overly vigilant and preoccupied with them. He turned and hurried toward the main street as their gazes locked. "Slave catcher," murmured Joshua. They rushed toward the gangplank, but doing so swiftly attracted attention. He recognized something. "We need to board immediately." As the odd group passed, other employees started to notice that their talks were halting. Catherine was burdened by the scrutiny and the questions that were growing in their minds. At the top of the gangplank, the Morning Star skipper was verifying people against his manifest. He was an elderly man whose face was worn from years of river travel. As they got closer, his eyes narrowed. He said, "Mrs. Kellerman," looking at her ticket, "you are traveling alone with 3 male servants." Catherine answered, "My husband recently passed." In a firm voice that belied her fear, "I'm going back to Kentucky to visit relatives. To pay off debts, these men are being transferred for sale." The captain looked at Daniel, then at Samuel, then at Joshua. There was a hint of mistrust in his face that Catherine could not quite place but could sense. Finally, he added, "I'm bored quickly. In an hour we'll be leaving." They ascended the gangplank, and until they arrived to the deck, Catherine refrained from turning to face Natchez. Her blood froze as she did. The man who had been observing them was now addressing 2 other people, one of whom was on horseback in an anxious manner. Turning his horse, the rider galloped toward the road leading to the plantations. Catherine stated, "They will notify my mother. We have 1 hour before she arrives with proof that I am not a widow, that these papers are forged, that we are fugitives." Joshua's mouth clenched. "Next, we hope that the captain prioritizes his schedule over assisting a plantation mistress." Catherine's cabin, a little but tidy space with a single bed and a porthole that overlooked the river, was shown to them. Although Joshua, Samuel, and Daniel were instructed to proceed to the cargo hold, the captain's mate who guided them appeared preoccupied, which allowed them to stay close to Catherine's cabin for longer than was customary. Samuel whispered, "Something's wrong. The crew has some knowledge. I can tell by the way they gaze at us." Time slowed down. As the sun rose higher in the sky, Catherine observed through the porthole as passengers boarded and goods was loaded. They were getting closer to leaving with each minute, but they were also getting closer to finding out. She noticed a disturbance on the dock at 7:30. Lucinda was here, and she wasn't by herself. 3 men, including the county sheriff and several plantation laborers with weapons, were mounted behind her carriage. With dreadful grace, Catherine's mother stepped out of the carriage, her face a mask of icy rage. She went up to the captain, and although Catherine couldn't hear what was being spoken, she could see her mother's demanding and haughty gestures. The skipper gave a headshake. Across the sea, Lucinda's voice increased. "Those men are stolen property, and that girl is my daughter." Their fate was determined when the captain permitted Lucinda to board. Catherine realized their window of opportunity had passed when she heard the voices become louder and footsteps on the deck. Her cabin door exploded open. The sheriff's men were holding Joshua, Samuel, and Daniel at gunpoint behind Lucinda, who was framed in the doorway. "Did you really think you could get away?" More horrifying than if she had screamed. Lucinda's voice was hushed. "Did you really believe I wouldn't be aware that I couldn't locate you?" For the first time in her life, Catherine was not afraid of her mother as she stood up. "Just anger. I discovered my father's will. I'm aware of what you did. The plantation was stolen by you. You falsified records. You used murder and deception to build your empire." Lucinda's face remained unchanged. "Because of his weakness, your father would have destroyed everything our family had worked so hard to achieve. I took the required action." "Those girls were killed," Catherine added. "How many others, Sarah, Emma, Rebecca? How many daughters perished in those barns as you, like an insect researcher, recorded their anguish?" Something flared in Lucinda's eyes for the first time. Lucinda stated icily, not regret acknowledgement that Catherine knew too much. The treatment was sound. Some subjects simply lacked the constitution to survive it. Their families understood. They were grateful for my discretion in disposing of the evidence. The casual admission of murder, the complete absence of conscience, was more chilling than any threat. Catherine knew then that her mother wasn't just mean. She was an emptiness shrouded in pricey silk, something beyond human emotion. "You'll come back with me," Lucinda added. "These men will be hanged for theft and assault. The documents you stole will be burned, and you will complete your treatment because you carry evidence of your shame in your very body." She had some inkling. Lucinda was aware that she was pregnant. According to Lucinda's interpretation of Catherine's face, "Dr. Harrison examined your room this morning. He found certain evidence that suggested your condition. He confirmed my suspicions. So you see, my dear daughter, your situation is far worse than simple disobedience. Joshua said, sprang forward, but was knocked to his knees by the sheriff's man's rifle butt. Above his eye, a wound gushed blood. "Hold on," Catherine yelled. "I'll accompany you." "Don't harm them, please," Lucinda remarked. "Oh, they will be hurt. They will be set an example. However, they will first find out who else is aware of your father's will. Has anyone else viewed these documents? We sent copies to lawyers in Philadelphia, abolitionists in Boston, and newspapers in New York. Even if you kill us or destroy Catherine, the truth will still be spreading." It was Samuel who spoke, he said clearly in spite of his fear. "You are illiterate slaves," she responded, but there was a hint of uncertainty in her voice. "You could not have," she said, delivering a falsehood and desperate bluff with such conviction that Lucinda's certainty faltered for the first time. "While you plotted your torture empire, I spent 3 weeks copying every document in your office. I can read and write better than most white men in this county," Samuel interrupted. "Most white men in this county," Samuel interrupted. It was all untrue, but as Catherine watched her mother's face change from certainty to fear, she realized that Samuel was buying time sowing doubt and making Lucinda think about things that were out of her immediate control. Every forgery, every fake death certificate, every letter arranging the disposal of bodies, all of it is documented, all sent north, all waiting to be published. If there is evidence of wrongdoing, if documents have been sent to authorities, there are no documents," said Mrs. Kellerman, his face disturbed. "This slave is lying to save his worthless life," Lucinda yelled. But Catherine could see the math in her mother's eyes as Lucinda was assessing the possibilities and risks. "Prove it," Lucinda demanded. "Show me evidence these documents were sent." Samuel steadily met her gaze. If even a small portion of Samuel's claim were true, exposure would destroy not only her reputation but her freedom. Murder could be concealed in Mississippi among the cooperative elite, but not if northern newspapers started asking questions. The standoff lasted for a while before Lucinda made the decision. "Sheriff, take them all into custody. Lock them in the county jail until we can sort this matter properly. Investigators do. Maybe in weeks, maybe in days, but it will come. If there are documents, we will find them." As they were brought off the riverboat, Catherine met Joshua's eye and said goodbye, both of them knowing that county jail meant torture to coerce confessions and execution, either slow or fast depending on Lucinda's mood. If they don't, these men will hang for their falsehoods. She was 19 years old, pregnant, and on the verge of being imprisoned by her own mother. But for the first time in her life, Catherine had made decisions that were truly her own. She had loved whomever she chose. She had fought for freedom, and she had seen bravery in the face of overwhelming odds. As they descended the gangplank, however, Catherine felt something shift inside her. The jail was a stone building that smelled of dampness and desperation. They were split up right away. Joshua, Samuel, and Daniel were taken to the lower level where enslaved prisoners were kept, while Catherine was put in a small cell with a barred window. Lucinda paid Catherine a visit that night, but she brought nothing but a cold assessment and no food. "You have cost me considerably," Lucinda said. "I hope I have destroyed everything you built on cruelty." Lucinda's smile was awful. "You have destroyed only yourself. By tomorrow, I will have gotten confessions from those men about who they are. The sheriff has questions. Other families are anxious about their own treatments. You have created complications." "Good," Catherine said. The implication was clear. Dr. Harrison has agreed to supervise to ensure no complications arise. The pregnancy would be terminated one way or another. They will be dead and buried in unmarked graves by next week. And you, dear daughter, will be sent back to the barn until your unfortunate condition resolves itself. You cannot keep doing this, Catherine continued, because eventually someone will notice. Either she would make it through the procedure, or she would join the other females who had been resolved. Someone will look into it. Who? Lucinda asked bluntly. The sheriff who relies on the power of my family, the physicians who benefit from my support, the families who help shape the destiny of their own daughters. Catherine, no one is coming to save you. Only I can determine what your future holds. After she departed, Catherine was left to face the darkness and the consequences of her failure by alone. There was stillness for 3 days. Neither Joshua nor Samuel nor Daniel spoke to Catherine. She asked questions, but the guards refused to respond. She received very little food, just enough to keep her alive but not enough to make her comfortable. as well as water and bread once a day. Daniel showed up to the window of her cell on the fourth day. He was still alive despite having bruises on his face and one eye swelled shut. "Miss Catherine," he said in an agitated whisper, "we don't have much time, so pay close attention. Where are Joshua and Samuel?" Catherine gripped the bars and asked, "Where are Joshua and Samuel?" Daniel's face told her everything before he even said anything. "They took Joshua 2 nights ago and said he was being transferred, but we both know what that means." "They have been questioning him," Catherine said, and the grief was immediate and crushing. "I am so sorry," Daniel added, tears flowing down his bruised face. "But Samuel, before they hurt him too much, he did something. Joshua was dead. The guy who had shown her what courage looked like. The father of her child was no longer with her. He actually wrote to the North. One letter to an abolitionist contact in Pennsylvania, but not copies of all the documents as he claimed. Weeks ago he mailed it. While he first had suspicions about your mother's actions, he filled them in on the missing girls, the farms, everything." Desperate hope shook Catherine's heart. "Are they coming? Is anyone going to believe him?" "I'm not sure," Daniel said. "But you must live till they do, Miss Catherine. You have to put up with whatever your mother has planned, because there won't be anyone left to testify if investigators arrive and you're dead. The only witness who cannot be written out as a liar is you." He was correct. It was no longer only about her survival. For Rebecca, Emma, Sarah, and everyone else, it was about justice. It was about bringing Lucinda's network of cruelty to light. "How am I able to live?" Catherine inquired. Daniel said, "Agree to everything. Tell her you will be obedient. Make her think you are broken and wait." Catherine acted out Daniel's role when Lucinda came over that evening. She cried. She pleaded for pardon. She pledged to obey, even though the tears came from anger rather than regret. The performance was compelling because they were genuine. Feeling content that her daughter had been adequately restrained, Lucinda made arrangements for Catherine to return to the estate, not to the barn, but to a secured chamber within the mansion where Dr. Harrison could discreetly treat her illness. The ensuing weeks were a haze of terror and loneliness. Despite the little nourishment and ongoing stress, Catherine's pregnancy continued to progress. Dr. Harrison made routine visits and performed cold clinical examinations. Catherine understood the plan, but he never mentioned ending the pregnancy. She would be permitted to carry the pregnancy to term. It would then be announced that Catherine had suffered a tragic stillbirth, and the kid would be taken and disposed of. However, things started to shift in late October. Downstairs, Catherine heard loud voices and Harrison entered with extraordinary urgency. Catherine had never heard such a hint of panic in Lucinda's voice. Catherine was transferred once more the following morning, this time to a carriage that was headed toward Natchez. Although there was no explanation, the journey's rapidity betrayed desperation. 2 men in formal attire were waiting for Catherine in a room at the county courthouse. They identified themselves as Pennsylvania Anti-Slavery Society investigators dispatched to investigate allegations in a letter they had received from Mississippi. One investigator stated, "Mrs. Kellerman has been most cooperative," in a tone that suggested he did not think Lucinda's assistance was sincere. "However, we need other witnesses to testify. I take it you're Catherine Kellerman?" Catherine turned to face her mother, who sat stiffly in her chair, a mask of restrained rage covering her face. After that, she turned to face the detectives and made her decision. "I have a lot to tell you," she said. Hours were spent testifying. Catherine went into great depth. Her father's secret will, the barn, the forced work, the other missing girls, the fakes, the killings that were passed off as natural deaths. After taking notes and asking inquiries, the investigators were able to piece together the entire extent of Lucinda's operation. One investigator's face darkened when Catherine brought up Joshua's execution and her pregnancy. His body was never returned. Lucinda remained silent the entire time, her lawyer whispering urgently in her ear. But as the evidence grew, her confidence dissolved. Documents were produced and Samuel, who was barely alive, was brought to testify. The man was killed without trial. "My mother ordered it," Catherine confirmed. The sheriff complied. Daniel verified every detail, and the trial that ensued turned into one of Mississippi's most scandalous. Lucinda Kellerman was accused of several murders, forgery, and property theft, while other plantation families involved in the treatments were scrutinized. Some fled the state, while others destroyed evidence and claimed ignorance. In January 1844, Lucinda was found guilty and given a life sentence. Catherine gave birth to a son in February 1844, naming him Thomas Joshua in honor of her father and the man she had loved. Using her father's valid will, she inherited the Kellerman plantation and promptly started the process of manumission, freeing all the enslaved people on the property. She died in the state prison 2 years later, her body buried in an unmarked grave. Her name struck from the society pages she had once dominated. Samuel survived his injuries and continued to work on the plantation as a paid servant. Worker, assisting Catherine in navigating the change. Daniel also remained, seeking the education that had been denied to him. Together they created something unprecedented, a Mississippi plantation run by former property owners without the use of slave labor. In the spring of 1844, the barn where Catherine had been imprisoned was demolished, and 7 sets of bones were discovered in the ground beneath its foundations. Catherine made sure that Rebecca Cartwright, Emma Singleton, Sarah Whitfield, and 4 other girls whose identities were not confirmed for months, Abigail Henderson, Margaret Ashworth, Virginia Thorne, and Elena Pewitt, were buried in shallow graves, along with 7 girls who had not survived Lucinda's treatment, and 7 daughters whose families had decided to accept their deaths rather than question the methods that caused them. What do you think of this story? Do you think everything was revealed? This mystery demonstrates that the greatest horrors are human, not supernatural, and stem from an obsession with appearance, a devaluation of life and systems that shield cruelty under the guise of respectability. Go. Your remark here. Please subscribe and push the notification if you like this story and would like to see more horror stories like it. Bell and share with a mystery-loving person. There are many secrets in the past, and some are more sinister than we would like to think. I'll see you in the upcoming video.